Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is Jess Woods, and I am the author of The Process of Praying. Right now, this is my only book. I do have a manuscript that I'm working on, but because I have three kids at home and I'm a full time teacher, it's probably going to be a little bit before a second book is published by me. I grew up in Northwest Georgia. We've lived a multitude of places. I currently reside in Alabama. And from an early age, I had an intense interest in storytelling and reading and writing. Before I could even write, I was telling these elaborate tales. And then when I learned to read, I pretty much always had a book in front of me. So I knew that I wanted to do something with reading or writing when I got older. And I thought that I probably would write something eventually, but life just kind of gets busy and gets in the way. It was about 5 years ago that my husband said, you know what? You just need to make the time to do it. And I had this idea that had been kind of nibbling at me for a little while and I couldn't quite let it go. And so I said, okay, yeah, let's do this. So we carved out time throughout the week so that I could write. And I almost always had to go outside of the home because when we have, the little kids at home, it's hard to concentrate. So I would take several hours outside of the home. I would have some classical music, lots of research went into this book. So lots of books surrounding me, notes everywhere, and I would go and just write pieces at a time. And it took me probably about a year to get a finished first draft, and then it had to go through edits and all of that and revision. But what came out of it was this book that's so very near and dear to my heart because it is based loosely on my great grandmother. And I'd love to show you a picture. So these are my great grandparents, Violet and Miles. I did keep their names in the book. The children in the book are completely different. It's not really based on their real children, but the characters of Violet and Miles and the experiences within the book are based on things that happened to them or could have happened to them. So this was my inspiration. Growing up, I did not know my great grandmother. She committed suicide before I was born. And I do remember stories of her compassion and her generosity and just how much she meant to her community. But nobody would really talk about what happened leading up to her suicide. So that was something that had always really intrigued me. And I started digging into that a little bit and got some of her children to open up to me, and I learned that what she probably had was postpartum depression, which was not recognized and certainly would not have been treated appropriately in this time period. So it got me to put myself in her shoes and think, well, if I didn't have access to the mental health care and the resources that are available to all of us today, would I have gone down the same path? Would this same thing have happened to me? So I began reading widely. I read over 40 books, and they were medical texts, they were memoirs, they were some fiction. I read medical reports, all kinds of stuff to really put myself in this situation, immerse myself in the details so that I could give a story that was as historically accurate as possible, even though it might not always reflect things that specifically happened to my great grandmother. So that was kind of my inspiration. The process of fraying is based in 1930s, 1940s Tennessee in a small town right outside of Knoxville. Violet, the main character, is a pillar in her community. She's known as this generous, compassionate woman. She helps anybody out, even the homeless men who kind of run the railroads know that they can stop at the farm and get a hot meal. So that's the kind of person that this main character is. When she begins to struggle with odd thoughts and depression, she turns to the church for help and isn't able to find help there. And she turns to the doctors and the medical community for help, and she's not able to find help there. So she has to decide what it means to heal amid the chaos of everything that's going on within her, the loss of identity, the family turmoil that this is causing, and all of the stigmas that surround mental illness. I know that sounds like such a heavy topic, and you're right, it definitely is. But I feel like I've also incorporated some really lovely home and family scenes, some beautiful imagery, and I think it ends on a hopeful note. I at least hope it does. So even though it seems heavy, I really wanted to write a book that was enlightening and inspiring. I didn't want it just to be a book of condemnation of, oh my goodness, look at how much they didn't know or look how far we've come. I wanted it to help readers connect to a character who was struggling. I wanted it to help readers maybe even reflect on harmful stigmas in our own life and in our own culture. And I think it did that. I get a lot of feedback about how this is a novel that either someone can find a piece of themselves in, or maybe it's caused them to think or just see things a little bit differently. So with all of that being said, I thought I might read to you a couple of scenes from the process of praying. And the first one is just a really quick scene. One of my absolute favorite things to read and study, and also one of my favorite things to write, is imagery. So, this is a scene that occurs in the middle of the book, and it just has a little bit to do with this just the image of being out on a farm and how healing nature is. And that is something that I think was passed on to me by my great grandmother, even though I didn't know her, is this love for nature and the love for being outside and things that grow and finding healing in that. So, this is a really quick excerpt from chapter 29 that gives you a taste of some of the imagery. The presence of summer was a slight tease, a mild start. In Tennessee, seasons came in gradually, sometimes teetering between two for a while before committing to a specific pattern. Violet felt the rhythm of change like the ocean's tide, steady and compressing, natural and compelling. For the first time in a while, there was a surge of hope, and it surrounded her as swaddling cloth to a babe, the type of confinement that brings comfort. Hope was the essence of honeysuckle. Hope was the cloud settling into perfect aesthetic position, hand painted, stretched out, and fluffed. Hope was the song of the birds, an ever present trill. Hope was the subtle breeze whose absence was only felt when the sun bore down in the late afternoon. Hope was the feeling of feet in a lackadaisical creek. And this part really takes me back to my childhood. The farm that they lived on is still in our family. So I definitely was able to connect to some of those images and that experience of having my feet in the creek. So what I found really cool about writing this is I could draw on settings that I really knew and experiences that I had as well. I'd also like to read to you just a little bit from chapter 28. It's the chapter before this. During this time, I'm sorry, Violet has really gone through quite a lot of trauma, and she's very resilient. She tries to keep coming out of it, and she handles it beautifully for the most part, probably much better than I would if I had been in her situation. And in the middle of this section, she is introduced to a new neighbor, and that's where Beta comes in. And so, what you're going to see in this scene is a little bit of her heart for family and her longing for restoration within her family, but also her desire to have purpose and to have a meaningful connection, a friendship in a time where she feels like she's sort of been ousted from her community. So, this is from chapter 28, titled Beta. Violet arrived home to a pot of beans already simmering on the stove. Tomato and onion had been sliced and laid to the side. A jar of pickle relish had been brought up from the cellar. Whether it was Sarah or Lottie, someone was anticipating that Violet would not be handling dinner. Perhaps the girls had simply gotten into a routine while she had been away for those few long days. And if there was one thing that was true on the farm, it was that routine was breath. It became second nature, and it was hard to break. Order turned to iron. A nagging secondary thought emerged triumphant, a shrill caw echoing through a cavern. Perhaps the true issue was a little more humbling. Did they think she wasn't capable? Was her morning absence an indication that she was no longer reliable in their eyes? Busying herself, Violet wiped the countertops, ran a broom over the floor, and got out the ingredients for a good cornbread. She spent the rest of the afternoon piddling around, rearranging pillows, dusting, running lemonade to the boys. She felt lost amongst it all, and she decided that Miles must allow her to help Beta. Her presence felt unneeded at the farm amid her children who were growing and finding their own place in the world. Sarah had been picking up more working hours at the post recently. Lottie had begun courting a nice boy from the neighboring town. She had met him at a revival, nonetheless. Hank, well, she couldn't say for sure what his place was at the moment. She wasn't certain he could either. Of course, she still had a few young ones, but because they were the youngest of seven, they didn't seem as young as their siblings had. Already, they were eagerly pushing boundaries and nudging into years earlier than she remembered the others doing so. It wouldn't be long at all before they were all out, and she would be a lone mama bird. You never can just stop being a mama, but the roles change, and though you've been immersed in rearing children for nearly as long as you can remember, you must take on some other form while mama remains the beat of your heart. The thought was terrifying, hollow. At dinner that night, she told the table about Beta, about the trinkets in her house, about the way she stretched her words like taffy. Charlie belly laughed when Violet mentioned that she had been greeted with the barrel of a gun. And when Charlie belly laughed, everyone laughed until they cried. There was a certain contagion that couldn't be missed in his laughter. Violet thought undeniably that his laughter alone could cure the world of all ailments if he just laughed long and loud enough. With spirits high, she told them she intended to help Beta learn English well enough to get by, maybe secure a job. Her stomach pitter-pattered as Miles swallowed his cornbread down with a swig of buttermilk. A good piece of cornbread takes a bit to swallow, but it seemed to take Miles forever to muscle it down in this moment where she was awaiting a response, an agreement. She watched his Adam's apple give a quick bob, and then an approving grin spread quickly across his face as he declared that it was exactly what she needed. Feeling satisfied, Violet spent the remainder of dinner listening to her family. Sarah teased Lottie about the boy. Abigail talked about a misunderstanding with her friend. It was normal family talk, and it felt nice to rest in it. Only once did she glance at the empty chair. Feeling that it was entirely unfair to cloud a perfectly good dinner with remorse, she turned her head slightly and focused on the other children. Towards the end of dinner, she heard the screen door open. Her heart took its beat from the creaking motion of rickety hinges. Open door, open heart. Hope. Palms against wood, she pushed herself up. Though her expectation must have been evident, Miles gave her a quick shake of the head, and she quickly sat back down, hope abating like a candle's flicker in the pelting rain. The children continued their conversation as if nothing were happening at all, as if a member of their family wasn't missing, as if he hadn't just snuck in for a plate of food but couldn't bother himself with a quick glance or maybe a hello. Closed door, closed heart. Okay, so I hope that you're able to pick up on Violet's love for family, on her desire for restoration within her family, some of that compassion for helping others and not just wanting a purpose, but to do good in the world. And I hope that's kind of what you saw there. Family was very important to my great grandmother, and so you'll see that in the process of praying. Nature was very important to my great grandmother, so you'll see that in the process of praying as well. I'd like to thank you for coming and listening to a little bit about my book and a little bit about myself. You can find me on Facebook at Jess Neal Woods. That's what I write under. Here's how you spell that. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter under the same handles. And if you would like to email me, you can email me at jesswoods.writer@gmail.com. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you if you have questions or if you would like more information about what's true within the book or what's not. You can go to my website, jessnealwoods.com, and you will find a blog post that has to do with what's fact and what's fiction. I think it's actually called Separating Fact and Fiction Within the Process of Praying. Bye.